stars of animation are shining. It's time to stay tuned. And now, here's your host, Phil Mackey.
Welcome. Well, come in. Kindly step all the way in, please, and make room for everyone. There's no turning back now. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this extra-spirited episode of Stay Tuned Live, the animation-themed talk show presented by Streaming the Magic right here on Facebook. My name is Phil Mackey, and I'm an animator, podcaster, and former Disney cast member, and it is my pleasure to be your host each and every week as we deep dive into the world of animated film. A few weeks ago, you may recall, my special guest on the show was Disney effects animator Dave Bossert. Well, aside from Dave's impressive career in animation, Dave is also an accomplished author, and if you're a fan of all things Disney, you really will be excited to know that Dave's latest book, 3D Disneyland, Like You've Never Seen It Before, is now available for pre-order. The book is a glimpse into the past and showcases a rare, never-before-seen collection of 3D photographs, and yes, the glasses are included in the book, of Walt Disney's theme park in all its glory. Disneyland is captured in time and space from opening week in July 1955 all the way through the 25th anniversary in 1980 and beyond. There are photos of attractions that no longer exist, like the Skyway to Tomorrowland and Skyway to Fantasyland, the original submarine voyage, Conestoga wagons, and the original Tomorrowland, and much more, along with vantage points that have changed dramatically over the decades. The signed, numbered, limited edition version of the book is only available at the publisher's website, theoldmillpress.com. This edition is limited to 750 copies, and folks, they are going very, very fast. So here's the information to pick up 3D Disneyland Like You've Never Seen It Before at the Old Mill Press. And by doing so, you'll be getting 20% off and free shipping, which is currently the best deal in the business. Okay, that is all about the book. And now, I'm very excited tonight to welcome a fellow podcaster to the show, and artist, I should say. This is my first time actually interviewing a fellow interviewer, and he is also a Disney-phile, to say the least, as well as that. So, of course, he's in excellent company with all of us here. So, and since then, Doom Buggies, or its founder, Jeff Baham, have been featured in the New York Times, Time Life Books, Variety Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, the Orlando Sentinel, and many other publications as an authoritative source of information about the Haunted Mansion or its storied history. I personally remember visiting his acclaimed Haunted Mansion internet-based tribute site over 20 years ago. So it's a real treat to now be talking to the one and only Jeff Baham this evening. So here to geek out with me over Disneyland history, Imagineering, and of course, the Haunted Mansion. Here he is, Jeff Baham.
Hey, Phil. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. I had to time that just right. I had to make sure I got the howl just right. So, yeah, really, really glad to have you here. And so, of course, welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I should say, Chef Mayhem. I guess I can call you that as well, right?
Yeah, old school people, the old timers, still call me the chef once in a while. Yeah.
that was a nickname that just was out of rhyming, right?
That was before Doom Buggies. That was my AOL. Like, you know how you got, I don't know, 5 names or something when you signed up for AOL. I just was making up rhymes for Jeff Baham that sounded internet-y, and Chef Mayhem, Jeff Baham kind of worked. So
it works very, very well. Yes. Yeah, I do remember that. I also remember having a bunch of those discs that sort of just seemed to be strewn about the home. But anyway, well, of course, we're going to talk about our favorite spook house. But before we did that, I first wanted to start with some cartoons.
Yeah.
For me, the Silly Symphonies were an early childhood memory with the skeleton dance and the old mill making a major impact on my young gray matter. And of course, the Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So I wanted to ask you, what creepy cartoons, Disney or otherwise, made an early impression on you, Jen?
Yeah, well, for sure, the Silly Symphonies, right? And I would say probably the Mad Doctor was more the one that I remember. In fact, I don't know, maybe it's been 20 or 30 years, but there was a point in time where some companies kind of went rogue with this whole Mickey Mouse is now in the public domain, even though it never really was. I don't remember exactly what went on, but I bought this little film strip player that had a little clip of the Mad Doctor in it. And you could hold it up to the light and watch like this movie. So the Mad Doctor kind of sticks in there. Of course, Ichabod Crane and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I mean, that was a Halloween staple.
Sure.
When I was growing up, it was on it would seem like Disney would play it almost every year on TV, right?
Yeah.
I also was, and the thing about this is I didn't even as a kid recognize that I liked it because of this, but Scooby-Doo was a huge favorite thing in my house.
Okay.
And I never, I cannot recall thinking like, oh, I love this because it's always ghosts and haunted houses and spooky things. That did not even, I mean, that's clearly why I was drawn to Scooby-Doo, but that was what I wanted to watch every Saturday, like Scooby-Doo. And it took me till I was past cartoon watching age when I thought, well, now I'm back into cartoon watching age. But before I realized, hey, that was all about haunted houses. No wonder I love Scooby-Doo so much.
That's funny that you draw that correlation, because I don't know that I was thinking about it until we're bringing it up now. But you know how the music at the end of the Haunted Mansion has this very 60s twang. I don't know what the description of that is. That style of like the Clampets go to, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's also very much present in Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. I mean, and the Haunted Mansion is rooted. I mean, I don't know. I want to get too ahead of myself, but it's rooted in the time they made it. Like the music has that jazz 60s late mid-century thing going on. Yeah, for sure. Like they copied a lot of movies that were popular at that time in terms of the style. So yeah, it's unabashedly like late 60s. Monster Kid, Haunted Mansion, everything. Yeah.
Did you ever? I don't know if you had the Disney Channel in the '80s, but if you did, do you remember Disney's Halloween Treat?
Oh yeah, yeah, I do. Yeah.
There's some really great stuff. Not necessarily all animated either. That came out of that, like the Boogedy Man and all that stuff. There was some just really great. But yeah, they would play all the all the creepy cartoons. And I remember I can't remember if it was showing the Purple People Eater music video that they made. I think they showed clips from the Haunted Mansion, like the heads popping up from behind the graves and stuff like that.
Yeah, they would use those kind of a lot here and there, just little bits of the Haunted Mansion they'd throw into stuff.
Yeah. So there's this kind of a history of Disney having some spooky, scary stuff, and then live action stuff, but then sort of blurring the line between the two, which I think is kind of interesting.
I mean, because Disney is one of the primary studios that did that. They would make, to save money, instead of doing a whole animated feature, they'd make live action feature and put in animated sequences. It kind of goes along with their whole idea. Like, we can mix those two things. People accept it. They'll watch it.
They definitely do mix those things. And actually, something I find interesting is how in the minds of many people, Disney seems to mean like kiddie or dumbed down. But going back to the 20s and 30s, there's quite a few examples of darker themes that made their way into their cartoons even.
For sure. Especially those Silly Symphonies. I mean, those were just general population film reel things, right? That would accompany films. And so it wasn't really made for kids or any specific audience, right? So yeah, there's some stuff. Yeah.
And then you get things like Lonesome Ghosts, right? And Lonesome Ghosts is this weird, which thing I mean, obviously it came before the mansion, but it does kind of make you wonder if those ideas were, or maybe you know something that I don't, but those ideas were, if they were permeating and resonating in those cartoons early on like that.
Well, there's a lot of stuff in Lonesome Ghosts that you can say seems to be echoed in Haunted Mansion. And Ken Anderson, when he was putting together the first ideas for the haunted house that became the Haunted Mansion in 1957, he had what he called a lonesome ghost as the host, and you would get like your real mortal host would get ripped out of the room, and this lonesome ghost would kind of follow you through the house. And I always thought it was a tie-in with the Lonesome Ghosts. In fact, he even designed some merchandise, like, we'll have these Lonesome Ghost balloons and we'll sell Lonesome Ghost wedding cake at the end. Like, he had some ideas. Chris Merritt, who just wrote a book about Mark Davis, and maybe we'll talk about him later, he seemed to think that Ken Anderson's Lonesome Ghost was a different thing. I still am not sure, to be honest, because there's stuff in the Lonesome Ghost, like where Goofy's looking in the mirror and there's ghosts looking back at him. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we have very similar thing going on in the Haunted Mansion, and just the general look of the place. Although, I mean, it's haunted house, shabby chic. I guess you could say that's a trope, but it's represented throughout the Haunted Mansion. So yeah, I don't know that I'm willing to totally throw out the idea that Lonesome Ghosts actually had a direct kind of impact on Ken Anderson. Yeah.
And plus, how tropey is it when that's like early 1940s and 50s stuff?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Started around then.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, let's see. I've kind of tried to do this, you know, come up with my own Halloween timeline of when were there haunted houses and when was this and when was that. Yeah. I'm not totally sure that I have that all figured out yet, but yeah, that was definitely early in the game. I mean, for sure, witches and pumpkins were all over postcards at the time, but whether or not the haunted house as a, like, you know, that seems to have come into its essence through the 40s and 50s. You had spook shows where magicians would travel out and do a midnight magic show, and they'd call up spirits and stuff. And somewhere around there is when the haunted house as an idea kind of took off, right?
Well, there was a big movement around that time too for spiritualism, wasn't there?
Yeah. Houdini was trying to, Houdini was trying to debunk all that, and that's kind of when it came to the fore, right? And then, yeah, but I mean, by the time the 50s rolled around, I think it was mostly like referenced in terms of shows that were just to scare you. Everyone knows this isn't real, but it's super freaky, right? Maybe it is real. Right. You know what I mean? So yeah, but earlier than that, yeah, for sure. I mean, spiritualism was a thing. Like I said, I'm not my whole timeline on all of this is a little, you know, yeah, with a grain of salt.
Well, look, if you ever get that timeline put together, let me know. I'd like to see that for sure. Well, obviously, this show is centered around animation, but so people might be wondering why we're talking about the Haunted Mansion. But the truth is, there is quite a bit of overlap, and you mentioned Mark Davis, so I think this is a good time to jump into that overlap right there.
Sure. Well, Mark Davis, so he came into the Haunted Mansion project about midway, right? So it started with Ken Anderson, who also was a big animation presence, right? Ken Anderson actually went all the way back to Snow White with the animation studio with Walt and Disney's, and he did a lot of one thing I should say that he was very useful to the studio for was his architectural background, because he went to school for architecture before he became animator for Walt. And so, like, for instance, even back on Snow White, he would build the little cottages and things so that the animators could kind of look at them and see models. And so when Snow White, when you're watching it and the architecture looks pretty strong, you know, perspective wise, well, it's because Ken Anderson built models for them to use. So he was kind of a natural. He was kind of a natural to go from animation to reality. Right. And Walt pulled him over, one of the first people to work in Disneyland out of animation. So every part of the Haunted Mansions, like the people really in charge of making it what it is, had strong roots in animation. But you talked about Mark Davis. So he came in, I don't know, right after the World's Fair, I think. So he was busy with the World's Fair. Then everyone came back and he jumped into the Haunted Mansion and Pirates. So he was working on those things concurrently, right? He had written a script for the Haunted Mansion sometime around 1965, I think, his own ideas. But he primarily settled into the role of creating the characters for the Haunted Mansion, because that's pretty much what he did for Disneyland, created sight gags and characters, which is not a surprise because he was such an incredible animator, right? Creating some of the most notable characters ever put on screen, right? And with a lot of, you know, he got that villain thing down too, you know, with Maleficent and Cruella de Vil. So he understood a lot about how villains and kind of how things can be evil, but also not alarming to the public, if you know what I mean. He was
The fine line to walk, absolutely.
yeah. He was mandated by Walt to bring the funny into Disneyland, bring the family entertainment, because before he was really working on Disneyland while he was still animating and Disneyland was open and young. It was entertaining, but it was educational. It wasn't a whole lot of laughs. There were funny shows like the Golden Horseshoe and stuff, but Walt wanted, like, for instance, he wanted the Jungle Cruise to be less of a nature, fake nature tour and more of a funny show, right? So, and same thing with Nature's Wonderland. So Mark Davis came in and created these little animated scenarios that could add some humor to what was going on at Disneyland. And so when the Haunted Mansion came up and he started working on that, of course, his you see some of his sight gags right there, right? The stretching portraits. He, wanted to bring things that were funny and appropriately spooky, but at the same time accessible to everyone, so they wouldn't freak everyone out, because he thought Walt wanted the park to be friendly to people, but at the same time they're pretty dark things happening in the Haunted Mansion when you think about it.
There are some of them. I think the unique thing about it is they seem to be more dark the more you dwell on them a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like those paintings are humorous, but if you stop and think about them, really, you're like, oh, this is actually the moment before something horrible happens.
Yeah. Actually, that's true. And something horrible does actually happen right in front of you, right there. The guy says, like, well, don't follow my example. And then you find out that he hung himself, right? So, yeah, there's some dark stuff in there.
I have some very fond memories of the stretching room, and then this hallway right here. Although this is Disneyland, California, I believe.
Yeah.
But something similar in Walt Disney World, because I was a kid of Walt Disney World. That was where our family went annually. But I remember going into this part for some reason, was just kind of burned into my brain, and it just had the ambiance, I think, was really what sold me on the whole thing. But those paintings alone, that's another sort of and the bust right there is sort of an animated trickery. Like, animation is a wonderful magic trick, as we all know, and the house, the mansion itself is full of trickery like that.
Yeah, well, if you take a bit of a step back to what Walt Disney kind of, how he, whether it was instinctive or what he meant to do, he created Disneyland with animators and film studio people. So he brought in his animators. Then they called Disneyland Cannibal Island for a while, the people that didn't get chosen to go over to work for Walt, and he was taking all the best animators, right? But then also he hired a bunch of Fox artists and people that worked at the studio, not his studio, but 20th Century Fox, so that he had all this kind of really a strong film background for putting Disneyland together. I think he knew, just, well, of course, instinctively, that's how Walt was, but he knew that to make this work, it has to be like a film set, but brought to life, that you could like interact with and go through and be a part of. So animation was a big part of that. So like you say, like you see these animated pictures here, the little knight has a little animation to him, like, well, audio animatronics, right? Exactly. So animation was a key to the whole park. But
the candle, floating.
Yeah.
And then in recent years, quite literally, they've brought animation into it. I'm speaking specifically about the hitchhiking ghost mirror effect, where they've gone back in and made that, like, these CG ghosts that are floating around the mirror with you.
Yeah, and that has some mixed reviews from fans. Whether or not it succeeds in melding with the vibe of the whole attraction might be up for a debate, but you can't deny that it's kind of a cool thing, right? You get there and like it's really magical. Like, they can pull your head off and throw it around and stuff. They catch a picture of you and then they just go for it. So there's some animation with nothing but a shadow, like a mechanical animation. So it's kind of, yeah.
So obviously this ride had a profound effect on you growing up. Is that specifically what just was memories of the ride, what led you to create such an extensive online database for doombuggies.com?
You know, it's a lot of things. It was more the record album. I grew up with this record album, The Story and Song of the Haunted Mansion. I must have gone through copies of that. I know because we had like 3 record jackets when I finally moved out to go to college. So I knew there were lots of these records that I went through as a kid. I didn't realize it at the time. I had very patient parents because I would like trace the ghost pictures when I was learning how to be an artist and draw.
Oh, that's great.
You
put paper over the album cover?
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. With the record in there and everything. Just learn how to draw ghosts.
You still have those drawings?
Oh, I don't know. No, I don't actually.
Ah,
yeah, it's kind of a bummer. but the record album, like that was key to me. And I always remember thinking when I went into the Haunted Mansion, like, oh, this is so awesome, but the voice is wrong. Like Paul Frees, who is the most amazing, talk about animation, like some of the voices in the attraction also. But you know, he's the ghost host and it's amazing and everyone knows that. And he was the master, right? But when I went in as a kid, I was like, well, where's my British kind of echoey ghost host? Like that's my ghost host and he's not here. And I think there were kind of a lot of kids like that. And I, you know, like, sidebar, I've gone on to become friends with Pete Renaday actually. And that was just like, I don't even know how to, like, I became friends with one of my main idols growing up, the voice of the ghost host. So yeah, that's something, but it was that record mostly, I think, that pulled me into the Haunted Mansion. I was actually kind of scared of the Haunted Mansion. I'm a timid little kid. I didn't want to go in haunted houses or anything like that. I put them on all through high school and college. I would, the best I did was like a little strip mall haunted house, you know, but we had some haunted houses, and me and my buddy, and there's another animated. There's some, all the animation going on right here.
A lot of animation in the attic.
Yeah, but I was kind of timid, so I didn't really go on it right away as a little kid. I was probably in junior high school before I went on the haunted. At least 10 years old before I went on the Haunted Mansion. But I just loved. I mean, I loved it. That's why I didn't want to go on because I loved the record so much, and I knew what was in there, right? Because it had to be whatever was on the record album, and I didn't want to see that stuff in real life. So that kind of, while I both loved it, it also kind of scared me out of going into the thing.
It's that classic thing where you're like, you watch a horror movie and you know that you don't want them to go down the basement, but you know they're going to go in the basement anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So and you mentioned Paul Frees. I'm really glad you did because Paul Frees had a great career as a voice actor in animated cartoons as well.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Badenov, right? That's and
he was in The Grinch, I believe, also. I think
he was Paul Frees. Yeah. And Thurl sang the song, so both Thurl.
Yeah, there you go. Thurl Ravenscroft. There, yeah.
And, there's also Paul Frees was Van Drake, and he also was the Pillsbury Doughboy. Right, so there's stop motion. Yeah,
that's so funny.
Yeah, he was the Pillsbury Doughboy. So yeah.
So viewers who are watching this show right now may know you already, Jeff, from your Nostalgia podcast, but you also produce a show called Storied. What can listeners expect there?
Okay, my master plan for Storied remains actually, and this is kind of, I like to think of it as innovative. It might be just self-destructive, but what I'm thinking it is a podcast that you do your series of stories, you tell a story, and then it hands off to some other producer, and it just becomes someone else's podcast, right? So as far as the Haunted Mansion angle, kind of won't be too long-lived, right? I have 2 episodes out now. It's just a telling of the creation of the Haunted Mansion, really. There's a lot of ways to tell that story, actually. A lot of different angles. I wrote a book about it, and since I wrote the book about 6-7 years ago, I also redesigned and rewrote all of Doom Buggies, and I found myself telling the story slightly differently when I did Doom Buggies. Okay. And Storied, it's the same thing. I'm like telling it, but I'm just naturally finding it to go in a different direction, right? So but it's a telling of the history of the Haunted Mansion. You can find it on any podcast player. Since I started it a few years ago, there is a lot of storied podcasts now, and since mine only has 2 episodes, you might have to dig a little bit, but it's there. You'll find it somewhere. Okay,
so for folks to find Nostalgia and to find Storied, they just search those 2 words, Storied and Nostalgia.
Yeah, nostalgia. You can go to nostalgia.com. I think I have the storiedpodcast.com maybe somewhere. I think that's a website. I don't remember exactly what I called it, but you can just go to your wherever you get podcasts storied and look for the one that
Whatever podcasts are heard.
that's right.
Let's do a little bit of speculation, Jeff. I love this kind of stuff. So it seems to me like comic books are this sort of proving ground for taking an intellectual property further. And the Haunted Mansion has absolutely had its share of comics. So would you say it's likely that another film or perhaps maybe an animated series could be in the works?
Okay, so speculation. This is full speculation because I don't have inside information about this. I would say, yeah. I mean, Disney would be. I want to. Well, right now, who knows what's going on right at the moment? But if you take away this year and the next year or two from whatever, they would be kind of foolish to not look at the Haunted Mansion as an intellectual property to exploit, right? Because it has probably the strongest fan base of any Disney attraction. I think probably even more than Pirates. I would have said up until a few years ago, Pirates was still probably number one, and the Haunted Mansion was more of a niche thing. But I think now it's pretty much become the fan base. If you want to find a single subset to Disneyland in terms of fans, I would venture to guess the Haunted Mansion is a safe bet. And so, yeah, of course. I mean, Guillermo del Toro wants to make this film. Last I heard, he wants to make this film. Now, he did Crimson Peak, right? So
yes.
A lot of people, especially lately, have been saying, well, that kind of was his Haunted Mansion movie. You know, he just did it anyways and called it Crimson Peak. Well, you know, I think if the stars lined up, he would still, in a hurry, produce the Haunted Mansion movie for Disney. So I don't necessarily think that's a complete out of the question thing. Last I heard, he still was interested. He will answer my emails on occasion. So, but he's never said to me like, "Hey, guess what? coming soon." He has said, "Well, if anyone is going to hear about it first, it will be you." So I haven't heard anything yet. So there goes that. And you know, they've been doing Haunted Mansion animated stuff. There was that stop motion Haunted Mansion stuff that they used for little inserts, I think, in the Disney Channel last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago already.
I think it was 2 years ago.
A couple of years ago, yeah. But like I said, I don't have any secrets to tell you. I wish I did. But
it's all good. But they also brought out a Museum of the Weird comic book not too long ago. Yep. And that was going to be part of the Haunted Mansion at one point, right?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, in Walt's mind and in Rolly Crump's mind, I don't know that it ever was in anyone else's mind part of the Haunted Mansion. But it got onto TV, right? So Walt had this little part, the 65th anniversary, which is still a full 4 years before the Haunted Mansion opened. He was showing the Disneyland ambassador all these different things going on at Disneyland. One of them was the Haunted Mansion they were building, heavily involved with the development. And he showed her like the magic skeleton playing the organ and stretching portraits. And then he said, and here's Roland and making this. And he says, what do we call it? The what? The what? And Rolly goes, Museum of the Weird. Well, so, yeah, I mean, it was in Rolly Crump's mind for sure. For sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I mean, who knows if there's going to be, again, they brought it out in comic book form. Who knows if there's going to be any plans for that? But I think I was reading something about the Museum of the Weird potentially being a restaurant that was going to be attached to the mansion. Am I saying that right?
Well, I'm sorry. Hang on 1 second.
That's all right.
I don't know about a restaurant. I think it was more of a queue idea, like something that people could kind of, you know how at Disney World they built this big fancy queue, right? So I think it was sort of more that kind of idea where people could go in there, look at some stuff if they wanted, or kind of widen through there on the way in or out of the Haunted Mansion. Mm-hmm. But I don't know about a restaurant, other than the general idea that they kind of seem to always think about, well, what if we put a restaurant with this? You know what I mean? Like, so it's possible,
yeah,
that they were kind of talking about that, but I think it was more of a queue solution.
Okay,
it didn't get very far because no one wanted to do the Museum of the Weird. Like Rolly thought he really wanted to do it, but he didn't even want it to be separate. He wanted it to be Like, this is what the Haunted Mansion should be, all this weird stuff, right? And then Walt said, well, I like it, but I think Walt kind of knew the other Imagineers weren't on board. So Walt said, well, what if we kind of make this like an adjunct to the Haunted Mansion? And then nothing happened because none of the other Imagineers really wanted to go that direction, and Walt passed away shortly thereafter, right? So they really just, until the comic book came out, it kind of was just kind of legend. And Rolly Crump kind of stuck up for it and talked about it over the years. But other than seeing his ideas, and his drawings, that was pretty much all there was.
Well, a big part of what's brought the ride to the forefront of people's thoughts is doombuggies.com, from what I understand, right?
Well, I'm not fully qualified to answer that question. I've heard, people have told me they've gotten inspiration for this or that from doombuggies.com. I honestly, I don't know. I designed it because I love the Haunted Mansion. I knew there was a fan base out there, but I've since heard from like a spectrum of people, all from executives at the company to Imagineers to animators. Lots of animators from other studios especially love to come to Doom Buggies, to just fans, magicians and actors.
Sure.
Everyone loves the Haunted Mansion. So it's hard to say, like, did Doom Buggies really do much? Kind of help focus, especially I think Doom Buggies as a project had its peak when the Disney Haunted Mansion movie was being produced, because at the time social media was young, message boards were still the way to group up with people, you know what I mean? So we had just thousands of people on our message boards, and Don Hahn reached out to Doom Buggies and said, come to our sets and let's walk you through it and let's kind of collaborate on this. And we gave away, I think, 1,000 movie tickets. It was just kind of a big thing. And I knew at that time, like, well, Doom Buggies, obviously, the company sees it reaching out to people in a certain way that they appreciated. And so, it's hard to say because there's so many things about this kind of genre that the Haunted Mansion falls into. There's the whole Disney angle and theme park angle, but there's also the Monster Kids thing I was talking about. Yep. There's also just the gothic nature of it, and that's a whole different subculture. So there's just how much we all, I think, as a kind of not a movement, but as a bunch of groups coalescing together around the Haunted Mansion, I think it just kind of gives it a lot of commercial appeal to the Disney company. So
there is something kind of for everybody. There's a little bit of something. That's what I think is such a amazing accomplishment of the attraction, is that they did make a blend of scary and silly, and it gives you this sort of chance to catch your breath, and there's something fun and foreboding, all those things mixed together. It gives everybody a chance to enjoy something.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something for everyone, right? I mean, that's what Walt tried to do with Disneyland in general, and especially Mark Davis, circling back. He tried to make every attraction he worked on have a communication to every age and every type of person. The Haunted Mansion specifically has that, but you kind of see that throughout Pirates and lots of the different attractions. Of course, Pirates was a little more rooted in kind of a, I don't want to say misogyny, but a little bit more rooted in the moment of time. So you see some changes coming out of that, right? I don't know. We'll see how that gets through the next era, which is fine. Like, culture changes. Let's adapt and move forward with it. That's great. But in general, I think the parks were designed to appeal to a wide variety of senses of humor, cultures, and backgrounds, and I think it's pretty successful.
It is beyond successful, I would say, and stuff like we're seeing right here with the
that's the Magic Lantern, right? So there's animation history for you from the 1700s, right?
There you go.
So yeah, the Haunted Mansion. One of the most amazing things is the technology in it spans just projections, right? And then but specifically animation, the Magic Lantern, which is one of the first animated things, right? I don't know. You might know more about this than me, but they could charge
the zoetrope thing, I think.
Yeah. You could charge admission and show people this repeating projected shapes and images, and people would think, "Holy cow, that's amazing!" And then you go through all the way through to like the Hatbox Ghost at Disneyland now, which has digital animation and also physical audio animatronic animation, and just the span of history. And then there's of course the famous Pepper's Ghost, which is mechanical animation, right? But that's from the late 18th or the late 19th century, I believe. So it just like the Haunted Mansion is not a technological achievement; it's a storytelling and effects achievement, right? So
absolutely, and the effect that you're talking about in the graveyard there with the lantern effect, that always called to mind to me Night on Bald Mountain from Fantasia.
Yeah. Absolutely, with all the ghosts kind of spinning up. Yeah.
To me, there's all this overlap. Like we saw the hallway, the hallway of doors that were all knocking. But before you go through that hallway, there's the eyes in the wallpaper that are blinking. That kind of for me reminds me of Alice in Wonderland when she's going in the Tulgey Wood, and you got the eyes. So there's all these. I mean, for me, there's always a little bit of crossover as far as the Walt Disney Corporation has been about illusion of life. And when you go into an attraction, the illusion of life is even grander because now you have things that are physically moving in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's the ghost we were talking about doing.
Here we go. Yeah.
There you go. Swapping the people.
Yeah. So yeah. I think it's kind of cool. It's very different from Disneyland's, and I think people like Disneyland's mechanical effect largely because it still feels so. Like you were saying earlier, the Haunted Mansion, while it reaches everyone, you can tell it's rooted in the late 60s. Like it's a theme park attraction with buggies that carry you through like you would have, like a good 60s carnival ride, but on steroids, right? Yes. So people still, there's some things about it that people appreciate and don't want to necessarily change for the better or for the worse or for anything. And one of those is really those mechanical, ghosts that sit there with you and their heads kind of go back and forth while you.
I do like the mechanical stuff, though. I do feel like that sometimes mechanical can seem cheap, but when you're doing a spook house, mechanical can be creepy.
Yeah. In fact, one of the so there's a few there's a few mechanical animated effects in there. One of them is the claw that goes across the clock. That's just a shadow. You're on a shape, right? And another is
that's shadow. Not to interrupt you, but that shadow going over the moon. That was I want to say that was done in Ichabod, right? In the animated.
Yeah.
There was a big cloud that kind of went over when he's going into the woods and the frogs are saying Ichabod. I feel like that was a thing that happened. I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm going to say sure, but I don't remember. So.
Yeah.
But then the piano player in Walt Disney World, you go through the music and he's like, kind of on the ground, though. You see his shadow, but you don't see anything. And I kind of thought, like, did they animate that digitally to look old school? And my buddy that works at Walt Disney World said, no, it still is an old school mechanical effect that they're just, throwing shadow. But at Disneyland, the piano player is animated.
Sure.
So, I mean, you have the range, right, of digital animation, like the Bride.
The Bride. Right. She's got a very modern looking photographic, because it is a real person's face, right? They
did. I don't know how. I mean, they did some work to change it, but I'm not sure how much. But I think her face is filmed, and then I think the body is separate, probably, and they put it all together.
How about the Impossible Staircase or the Infinite Staircase, whatever that room is called?
The footsteps.
The footsteps. I mean, how many cartoons have we seen? Ghost cartoons where there's a bunch of little footsteps running. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And even some of the early Disneyland and haunted house concepts that Ken Anderson and I think Claude Coates worked on also had footsteps showing, ghost footsteps, right? So,
pretty cool stuff. Well, I wanted to make sure everyone knew where they could get a copy of your book before I forget about that. But I do want to tell everybody first, if you guys have questions for Jeff while we have him here, go ahead and start populating those questions in the comment section, and I'll try to get to as many as we can. And then in the meantime, while I'm waiting for those questions, I promise you I've got more of them myself. Let's get to your book first. Tell us a little bit about the unofficial history.
The unauthorized story of Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion.
I almost got it right.
Very close enough. And I mean, you just got to go to Amazon and type in Jeff Bam and Haunted Mansion, and it'll come up. I wrote this book because it just had always been percolating inside of my head so let's pause. So Jason Sorrell wrote an amazing book about the Haunted Mansion. It's Disney's official Haunted Mansion book.
I have it on my shelf. I won't grab it right now.
It's a great book. And the latest edition of it, they took out the movie. So it was a tie-in with the movie, the Eddie Murphy movie. Right. And the last quarter or so of the book was all about the movie. And they, the latest version, so there's been at least 3 versions of this book printed. And the latest version has a new cover. It's green with the hitchhiking ghost on the cover. And they took out the movie stuff and put in more information about Mystic Manor and Phantom Manor, expanded that a little bit. So,
those are the rides at the other. For those who don't know, Mystic Manor and Phantom Manor are the rides in Paris and Shanghai.
Mystic Manor is in Now you got me. Hong Kong or Shanghai? Either way, it's not even. I don't even consider it one of the haunted mansions. I think it was a mistake to put it in that book. So, but be that as it may, it's in the book, and it's no more movie stuff, right? So that's a great book, but it's a picture book primarily. Disney decided to go with a trade paperback picture book. So Jason and I we were talking about it when he was making the book, and he, did his very best to get as much in there as he could. But it's really not about an in-depth history. It's about letting people kind of page through, right? So I just thought, I just want to write a book to flesh out everything in there. And part of it was also I had written a lot of articles for different magazines and fanzines and things over the years. And I had a lot of writing done that I could just kind of start to put together and compile. So those things together, I just kind of thought it's time for me to do something with this information. Disney's probably not going to go in depth now that they did Jason Sorrell's book and keep reprinting it, like they're sold on that. So I wrote a book, and it's about the Haunted Mansion. And it's the first half of it is history. The cool thing about being not affiliated with Disney in any way, shape, or form is I can tell the stories a little more bluntly than Jason Sorrell could. So, the Imagineers did not super congeal about the Haunted Mansion ever. They really didn't. And then Walt Disney died, and it didn't get better. And most fans of the Haunted Mansion have kind of heard about, well, they thought about, is it going to be scary or is it going to be funny? And that's sort of true. I mean, I would say it was more, there were two kind of directors in there, Claude Coates and Mark Davis. And I would say it was more of a battle. Is it going to be more about the haunted house atmosphere, or is it going to be more about the characters inside? That's, I think, a little bit more, because Mark Davis did characters and Claude Coates was all about backgrounds and atmosphere. So if I was going to finesse it a little bit, I'd say that's more what they couldn't really figure out. Mark Davis is probably was over the years, probably the most vocal about not really thinking it came out the way he hoped it would. He said a number of times, there are too many cooks in this kitchen. But like the fan response has clearly not been so divided about what they did. People seem to like the fact that it's kind of silly, but also has these kind of dark moments, right?
Yeah.
And I think you could say pretty fairly that they kind of just split it up. Claude Coates did the beginning, and it's all, his kind of ideas and special effects. And then Mark Davis filled in with all the characters in the graveyard and everything. And I mean, they both worked on the whole thing. It's not that there's nothing super simple about telling the story, but that kind of, conflict, I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more. So that's in the book. And then just a lot of like nerdy details that you just can't put into a trade paperback with lots of pictures. Like I don't have any, well, I actually do have some pictures in the book. Not very many, because they're, copyrighted. The whole thing is trademarked and copyrighted by Disney, but some things we felt were either newsworthy enough or generic enough to put in there. Or
like the floor plans, you have those in there?
The floor plans are not in there. But there's like one thing that is in there, which I don't know if Disney would have anything to say about this or not, but it was too awesome to not put in there, is that when Doom Buggies first started, maybe 5 years after it started, a guy wrote to me and he's like, hey, I was looking through my sister's Polaroids from this trip she took to Disneyland, and I found this picture, and I thought you might think it was cool. And it's a snapshot of the Hatbox Ghost inside the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. Like in there, she went by and took a flash picture of the Hatbox Ghost in Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. And up till that moment, all the Disney and like Imagineers and even Jason Sorrell were saying, well, we don't really think it was in there when they opened. Like it was something they built, but I don't know, they maybe had it in there a little bit or not. Like no one really knew. And there was proof that it was there because I had a photograph. So I put that on Doom Buggies, and it's been there for decades, right? And so when the book came out, I finally had a chance to say, like, we're going to print this in this book because this is like the Hatbox Ghost in the Haunted Mansion. It has to be there.
How do you think it is? I mean, look, the 60s, it's not like it was that long ago. and it's not like Disneyland is a low-profile amusement park. How does something like that get buried?
You know, I think they were a lot more like, let's try this. And when the Haunted Mansion opened, they were probably still, because there's another thing that wasn't quite ready for prime time, where the hitchhiking ghosts are at the end and the ghosts in the mirrors. That also might not have been working on the opening day, like because there's somewhere in the plans you can see a different kind of effect there where like ghosts would be projected following you along through there rather than ghosts in your Doom Buggy. So I'm not sure about that, how that all timeline is either, but it does seem like they were kind of like, let's try this, let's try that. Oh no, it's time to open. What are we going to do? And I think the Hatbox Ghost just didn't really work. And so I think it was there for a day or two and they thought, oh, we got to get rid of this before like people start saying, hey, that thing isn't working. There's just one ghost in there and it's totally, you can see everything. It's not really working. I think they decided it's just not worth the risk of bad word of mouth. So,
okay. The effect wasn't really doing what they wanted it to do.
Yeah, that's what I understand. And that's the one thing everyone agrees on. It just wasn't working. So,
I mean, it works now.
Yeah, it sure does now because they're projecting it from behind, so they don't have to worry about the light, right? Right. But yeah, it's
for those who don't know, the Hatbox Ghost is a ghost that has his head and it appears to vanish and then reappear in a hatbox in his hand. But it is like Jeff was saying, it is an animated, a CG, I guess, animated projection effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the head is, of course, sculpted, but it's the whole motion of it is projected. I think the original one was handled just by lights. Like, we'll turn off this light and turn on this light. And I think they hoped people's attention would go back and forth, but it was just right there in your face, and they couldn't make everything just not appear. You know what I mean? So it just didn't really work exactly.
So that's one of those times where like the idea was too ahead of where the technology was.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the Imagineer who was kind of in charge of putting together the new Hatbox Ghost, he wanted it to be Daniel Joseph. He really wanted it to be super, not close to what happened before, but really reflective of what they hoped they could do with that effect before. And I think he did a pretty good job of getting like the spirit of what they really wanted it to do to happen. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And he's one of the most popular characters somehow. I mean, for whatever reason.
Yeah, he has always been. And they did have the Hatbox Ghost drawn on a lot of the promotional things at the beginning, like
character.
Yeah, Mark Davis' character. And so they did, I think this could be one of our characters. Like the hitchhiking ghosts were there, or at least the short Gus, the short guy, was one of the characters that they kind of used to promote, and also the Hatbox Ghost, but then he just wasn't there.
So random side question: what's the deal with Little Leota? I've never understood that.
You got me. I mean, so if you look at Doom, actually,
I'm sure it's on the website. I've looked at the website, but I haven't read it. You have so much information on it.
It could take you days. But if you look at the part, I think it's the page. If there's a tour, and you can go to the page about the exit.
Yeah,
there are some movies that kind of have the character not as a little doll ghost, but the whole idea of a character kind of in a crypt, or kind of, I think there's this one film that has these women that work in a mortuary, and it really there's a lot going on there that makes you feel like, oh, this character looks so familiar. You know, Mark Davis designed a lot of things just watching movies and saying like, hey, we could use this idea and we could use that idea. I don't know if she's just supposed to be far away or she's just a miniature ghost. Like, it really is interesting, right?
Yeah.
They did intend it to be there. It wasn't an afterthought. I don't know how early or late in the process she was developed as a character, but it's yeah, I don't really. It is interesting and unusual, right? This little ghost doll kind of thing, but she's alive and talking to you, and she's supposed to be in real space, so it's supposed to be a small little ghost, right? So yeah, I don't know. I can't give you any good insight into that.
It's
Unusual.
What's that?
It's unusual. Yeah.
It's very unusual, and it's curious. You were saying that they couldn't agree on things, and these characters didn't ever really fully get. I mean, you look at pirates, and there are characters that are just. You see a picture of them and you know who that character is. Like, you got the pirate with the pigs. You know who that pirate with the pigs is. Like, there's no question about it. And then you look at like the Haunted Mansion, and they definitely have those characters there, but it feels like over the years they've figured that out as they've gone on more now, and especially with things like there was a video game years ago, and they gave Leota a real like Southern Louisiana accent, which was not how she talks in the ride, but I mean, it makes sense given the proximity of where things are taking place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never actually put my thoughts together in that direction, but it kind of makes sense, right? It goes along with the idea of, and I don't want to overblow the conflict. It wasn't like every day everyone came to work and they were ready to beat each other up, right? It was just a philosophical like distinction between, is it going to be, you know, atmospheric, or is there going to be all these character gags in it? And I think, yeah, I don't know. You know, Mark Davis gags usually seem to include some kind of a recognizable character, right? But I think it most largely, if the graveyard was illuminated differently, I think that might be the case where you recognize those characters. But I think it's very they put scrims in front of everything so that the ghosts would look like they're hazy and in the fog, and I think that kind of takes away some of the characterization to the attraction itself. So like you say, now since it's so popular, both fans and the company are trying to like explain to us who are these people and what are they doing there and why are they there, and things that you can't just see automatically by looking at the scenes like you can in Pirates. Yeah, I would say that's probably like a result of the way they're presented, because Mark Davis has some gags in there that are just as funny as the Pirates gags.
Yeah, the bricklayer.
Yeah, boxing himself into a tomb, and then you know, some of the tea party. There's a tea party and there's a mummy, and you know, and a guy that can't hear what he's saying. Like, there's some funny stuff in there, but it's kind of muted by, I think, the visuals. And, you know, I don't want to, that's kind of cool because it does look foggy and ghostly inside there. But at the same time, you don't read it quite the same.
Well, and for better or worse, with the Eddie Murphy film, I do feel like the graveyard sequence in the movie captured what the attraction feels like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I liked, actually, I mean, this is a whole different topic, the Eddie Murphy movie. I mean, I'm probably along with the Haunted Mansion community at the moment. I probably was hoping it would be a little more Tim Burton rather than family funny. But at the same time, like, I got to walk on those sets and like look at how much they adored the Haunted Mansion when they were putting that together. Yeah, and it's like such a monumental love letter to the Haunted Mansion. So and you know, the other thing that's really interesting is, so all the kids that watched that movie that were 10 or younger are now adults, and they love that movie. Like, it has a ton of love right now because it's like they're, you know, Gremlins or whatever would be to me, right? And so yeah, so it still has a lot of popularity. Just it didn't as a film. I mean, it didn't do horribly, but beat $100 million. But it was
Pirates. Well,
it wasn't Pirates. Yeah. So
when a company gets so big like Disney is once you set a bar, if other things don't hit that bar, your vision of success is kind of skewed, I think.
Yeah, totally. And but I think it maybe underperformed a little bit when it was a release, but I think there's the movie looks beautiful, right?
Oh,
and to get back to what you said, yeah, the graveyard is phenomenal. Like, it's amazing. And yeah, I agree. Like, those hitchhike and the ghosts all in there dancing. Yeah, it is kind of like, this is what we have in mind for this graveyard.
The singing busts are probably like I think that is exactly what they should have done with the singing bus. They made them hilarious and kind of
another
world. And
yeah, and there's another instance of really good animation. I mean, this is just me being kind of my own personal nerdiness, but like, you could tell they made it to look like they were sort of a combination of stop motion and herky jerky and real stone. You know what I mean? Like, the way they just kind of, and that's cool. Like, no one really thinks about that, but I think about it, and it adds to the whole thing, right? So
I absolutely, I overanalyze that scene quite a bit. I'm right there with you. Right there with you with my own personal Ezra right here.
Awesome. Awesome. I have one of those too.
What's that?
I have one of those too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't do all of them big like that, but they just did the Ezra one. But of course, they made the one that's park exclusive, where he's sitting in a dune buggy.
Yeah,
I'm sure you have one of those, right?
I think I have most of the. I don't have the first original hitchhiking ghosts from Funko, but I have the Hatbox Ghost they did. I don't really collect Funkos, so I kind of decided, I'm not going to get those. Then, maybe, I don't know. And now I just, Funko kind of invades your life once you start.
Yeah.
You can say, like, I don't collect vinyl toys, and they just start being on your desk and in your bookcase.
I wasn't going to collect any of them either, and now I've got more than I think I probably should. So I'm right there with you on that one. Well, we don't have any extra questions from the Peanut Gallery this evening, which is okay, because we definitely filled our time. But I someone in the credits in the comments did echo your words when you said some people kind of prefer Pirates to Haunted Mansion. This person said Haunted Mansion is #1 in their book. And then Ryan Shaver jumped in and said Guillermo del Toro would probably make the movie just to spite people who said he'll never do it.
Well, he's never said he wasn't going to do it. And, who knows? That guy probably has 100 years worth of projects attached to his name. So he can just pick and choose what's going to work for him. So we can hope it's Haunted Mansion someday. Well,
before we say goodnight, I do want to, this was kind of in the back of my mind when you mentioned we were talking Lonesome Ghosts earlier and Goofy in that film. Did you ever notice how he straight up says, "I ain't afraid of no ghost"?
Now you're getting like onto a whole nother thing too, like the Ghostbusters tie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some people I want to say that film is responsible for everything. So, yep. Like I'll say Ghostbusters was inspired by that. But I did notice that. He also has they have that crazy scream at the beginning of that film that they put onto the Chilling Thrilling Sounds of the Haunted House record. And I never, there's all kinds of things about that movie that just spread out into the world of monster movies and Halloween and Mansion.
My favorite gag from that cartoon to this day, it gets a laugh out of me every time, is when I think it's Goofy's clawing at the walls to try to get out, and the ghost comes up behind him with a trombone, and I don't know why, but it makes you laugh every time.
Yeah, well,
it's more like they're stinkers. You know what I mean? They're not
really spooky, and that's the other thing. Like, that's why it's also Haunted Mansion, right? It's playful spooks, right? So
that's it. That's exactly what I think of. Well, this has been such a treat. I could talk about the Haunted Mansion forever, and I'm sure you could too, since you have been doing that. So for everybody who wants to hear more of Jeff, I highly recommend Nostalgia and Storied, and of course the Doom Buggies Spook Show, which I don't know how I didn't say that earlier, but I'm saying it now. So if you search your favorite podcast platform for Doom Buggies, I believe that'll make it pop up, correct?
Yep.
Excellent. Jeff, thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, well, I'll see you online.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye. Hey, everybody! Thanks for being here tonight. This is really a treat. I know it's July, and may seem a little bit early for spooky things, but I've always loved Halloween. It's my favorite holiday, and so I could talk about it any time of the year. And I also think when the heat is unbearable, Halloween kind of brings to mind cooler temperatures and just a more eerie, fun atmosphere. So I think this was a wonderful night of talking spooks with you guys. Anyway, I want to thank you guys all for being here tonight, and thanks again to all of my Stay Tuned patrons. Yeah, guys, your support continually encourages me each and every month and helps make it possible for me to keep doing what I do as an independent creator here with this show. If you enjoy these weekly free shows and you'd like to support them and see that they keep happening, go ahead and visit patreon.com/Philmaki to learn more about the various reward tiers and sign up today. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out my original comic books at philmaki.com. And be sure to say hi to me on social media here on Facebook. You can say hi on Instagram and Twitter, which I barely use, but I am there as well. You can just search my name, or you can search Retail Sunshine, which is the comic strip series that you see behind me. Once again, be sure to join the amazing Stay Tuned community right here on Facebook for free daily news from the world of all things animated. All you got to do that is go to facebook.com/groups/Stay Tuners. I've been Philmaki. You've been a wonderful audience. And until next week, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned.